The fate of the Democrats' bid to retake control of Congress and the Republicans' push to strengthen their hold on power is already in the hands of the voters. Voters will decide if Democrats can win majorities of either the House or the Senate, giving them a potential check on the power of the Trump administration. But the battle is not limited to federal races. 36 states are holding governor's races, and the control of more than half of state houses are also up for grabs. A January 2018 Pew survey found education the second most important issue in the year's election, behind only terrorism. But since then, education policy has fallen from the spotlight, although the issue of school shootings and gun control does remain a key issue for many voters. In February, West Virginia teachers walked off the job in a historic strike that quickly spread to half a dozen states across the country, putting a spotlight on underfunded teachers and classrooms nationwide. The strike resulted in some victories for educators and spurred others to run for office or join campaigns demanding schools receive adequate funding.
Yeah, I may be the only one up here who said quite plainly that I believe that we should tax the 1% more, and we should use it to increase funding for education.
The vast majority of public school funding happens at a state level, and many states cut this funding after tax revenue dried up after the 2018 Great Recession. A decade later, tax revenue is up, but according to the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, funding for education in 26 states remains lower than pre-recession levels. Meanwhile, educators continue to be paid less than similar professions, according to the Economic Policy Institute. But the issues facing public education goes deeper than funding or teacher pay, and what progressive education policy looks like has received far less attention than it deserves. To learn more, we recently sat down with a panel of experts to ask them about the challenges facing the nation's schools and what models for success look like.
Where are we seeing innovative strategies, progressive policies nationally that either the state of Maryland can look to, Baltimore City can look to? Are there candidates for office during this election cycle who are talking about really progressive policies that would provide access to equity across schools, right? As opposed to simply these Band-Aid approaches or, plugging holes with our fingers, really rethinking the way schooling is done.
I think it's like, equity is not really on the national conversation at all. In fact, I was just reading, it's kind of a summary of Betsy DeVos's work thus far, and how so.
It's a short read.
But
it's a depressing read.
But it's depressing in that people have, advocates have had to stem the tide on the lack of policy, right, around protections and equity for all kinds of different groups.
Together. So I think we have to, my mantra tonight is we have to totally, everything that we've been doing, we just need to stop. And we need to kind of start over again, because it's not preparing the students to face the world that's approaching.
But thinking about who informs education reform policy, it's never people like us, it's never teachers, it's never students, it's never the people that really encounter the work daily that are informing that policy. Right.
What should we be doing about the oncoming instantiation of automation and not being in a place 5 years from now where our kids are already behind because we're not having the conversation?
And don't forget about artificial intelligence.
Absolutely.
So often when we think about automation, we're thinking about factory kind of, those kind of skilled labor jobs, but artificial intelligence is predicted where there's very few jobs that are not going to get touched by this. So I think it's a fair question. But, and this is overly education scholarly, I guess, right? But John Dewey said 100 years ago, right, that you can't have education to prepare for the future because you don't know what the future is, right? So what you have to do is you have to have an education that prepares people for life.
We also talked to independent researcher and consultant Lois Weiner, who argues the conversation around education reform made a dramatic shift in the 2016 election, when both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump popularized discussions of economic inequality, albeit to very different ends.
So what we've seen this year was this really wonderful upsurge of activism among teachers in the so-called red states, pushing back against the defunding of education and the reforms of the last 2 decades that have deprofessionalized teaching, that have led to test-driven education, that have eliminated all the social, or many of the social supports, and the psychological and emotional responsibilities that teachers feel have to be part of our profession and have to be part of teaching. So I think what we've seen in the last 3 months at least is that the movement for education reform has been suffocated by the demand that the only thing that counts is electing Democrats to the Congress, taking back the House, taking back the Senate. And as long as we allow that to be our mantra, we don't grapple with the big issues of economic inequality and social injustice that education reform has to be a part of.
While praising candidates who support policies like a millionaire's tax to address inequality, Weiner says a lot more must be done to truly achieve a progressive education system.
A millionaire's tax is not going to raise all the money that we want. We need a fundamental realignment of social forces in this society. We need a fundamental struggle about who controls what is taught, how it's taught, and how the schools are funded. And there's no shirking from that. There's absolutely no shirking from that. And when we shirk from struggling on that big picture, on those big issues, we get pounded. That's the problem.
Go to therealnews.com for this full discussion. From Baltimore, I'm Jessel Noor.